You did not arrive here by accident, and this is not a dramatic claim meant to persuade you. It is a statement about timing. Certain messages only land when internal readiness and external conditions briefly align, creating a window where recognition can occur without resistance. That window is open now. Not because you searched for it, but because something in you was already oriented toward it. This is how coherence works. It does not announce itself loudly. It presents itself quietly, precisely, and only to the state that can receive it. What makes this moment time-sensitive is not the message itself, but your nervous system's current capacity to recognize it. There are periods when the body is less defended, when attention softens just enough for a new signal to register. During these moments, probability narrows. Certain timelines become more accessible while others fall away. This is not mystical exaggeration. It is the natural behavior of systems under coherence. When alignment increases, options collapse into clarity. When alignment fades, the field disperses again. Urgency here is not pressure. It is not fear. It is efficiency. Consciousness does not repeat the same invitation endlessly in the same form. When attention and readiness intersect, the field responds by offering a narrow opening. If recognition occurs, the system reorganizes. If it does not, the field moves on, not as punishment, but as function. This is why waiting for later often results in nothing changing. Later is rarely a moment of coherence. Later is usually a return to noise. You are not being asked to believe anything. Belief is irrelevant. Belief is mental, and the field does not respond to belief. You are being invited to recognize something that is already happening in your system. Recognition is not agreement. It is resonance. It is the subtle internal click that happens before thought, when the body registers truth faster than language can form around it. That recognition is the event. That is what opens timelines and closes others. Most people miss these moments because they expect them to look dramatic. They wait for certainty, proof, or emotional intensity. But coherence often arrives as stillness. As a pause. As a sense that something is quietly relevant without needing justification. That is what is happening now. The message is simple because complexity would miss the window. You are consciousness encountering a narrowing probability path, and the only requirement is presence. This does not mean something will be taken from you if you look away. It means something will reorganize elsewhere. Attention is the currency here. Where it goes, coherence follows. Where coherence stabilizes, reality responds. This is not about doing more. It is about noticing what is already aligning and allowing it to complete the circuit. You do not need to rush. But you do need to be here. Fully. Without bargaining. Without postponement. The window does not demand effort. It only responds to recognition. And recognition, once felt, cannot be unfelt. That is why this moment matters. Not because it is rare, but because it is precise. If you are aligned with this frequency, subscribe and remain within it. When something disappears, the mind tends to assign meaning to the loss. It asks what was done wrong, what should have been acted on, what opportunity was missed through failure or hesitation. But the closing of a window is not a verdict. It is not a judgment. It is physics. Systems reorganize based on attention, coherence, and efficiency, not morality. What closes was never taken away. It simply completed its function elsewhere. The field does not linger where attention cannot stabilize. Consciousness moves toward coherence the same way energy follows the path of least resistance. When readiness is present, probability compresses. Options narrow. Timing sharpens. When readiness fades, probability disperses again, not as punishment, but as rebalancing. This is why certain moments feel charged and others feel flat. It is not that one is better than the other. It is that alignment was briefly available and then redistributed. Most people misunderstand deletion because they view it through a personal lens. They assume something was meant specifically for them and then revoked. But the field is impersonal and relational. It does not decide who deserves what. It responds to where attention can be sustained without friction. If a signal cannot be received, the system reallocates it. This is efficiency. Nothing is wasted. It simply moves where it can complete the circuit. Probability is not fixed. It is constantly reorganizing based on signal strength. When attention locks in, certain outcomes gain momentum while others lose coherence. When attention wavers, the structure dissolves. This happens quietly, continuously, without announcement. By the time the mind notices something is gone, the reorganization has already occurred. The mistake is believing the mind was ever in charge of the timing. This is also why urgency exists, and why it feels different from fear. Fear contracts. Urgency clarifies. Urgency bypasses the analytical mind because analysis slows coherence. The mind wants guarantees, comparisons, explanations. But coherence does not wait for consensus. It responds to readiness. Urgency speaks directly to the nervous system because the nervous system recognizes windows faster than thought. It senses when something is available now in a way it will not be later. When urgency is present without fear, it is an invitation to attend, not to panic. It is a signal that conditions are briefly optimal. The analytical mind often resists this because it prefers control over timing. It wants to delay until certainty is achieved. But certainty is not how probability works. Probability responds to presence. And presence is only available now. Missed opportunities are rarely missed because of incapacity. They are missed because attention was elsewhere. Not wrong elsewhere. Just elsewhere. The field does not hold grudges about this. It recalibrates. It reorganizes. It offers new configurations when readiness returns. But it does not repeat the same configuration indefinitely. Not because it withholds, but because repetition without recognition is inefficient. Understanding this removes shame from timing. It dissolves regret. It replaces self-blame with clarity. You begin to see that life is not testing you. It is responding to you. And response is always about alignment, not worth. When something closes, it is not an ending. It is a redistribution of possibility based on where coherence can be maintained. This is why attention matters more than intention. Intention can drift. Attention anchors. Where you are present, the field engages. Where you are absent, it reallocates. This is not harsh. It is precise. And once you understand this, urgency no longer feels like pressure. It feels like information. Recognition is often misunderstood as something emotional, interpersonal, or psychological, as if it were merely the relief of being noticed or affirmed. But recognition, at its core, is not a feeling that comes from outside. It is a structural event. It is the moment a system updates its internal model of reality and reorganizes itself accordingly. In quantum terms, recognition is what collapses uncertainty into form. It is not comfort. It is configuration. When recognition occurs internally, something precise happens. The system stops broadcasting inquiry and starts broadcasting availability. This is subtle, but decisive. Before recognition, the signal says, something is missing. After recognition, the signal says, something is present. The field responds not to the story behind that shift, but to the shift itself. Probability reorganizes around the new instruction, and timelines that depended on waiting lose coherence, while timelines that depend on readiness begin to stabilize. This is why recognition cannot be outsourced. External validation may temporarily soothe the mind, but it does not alter the broadcast unless it is metabolized internally. Without internal acknowledgement, external recognition passes through without impact, like sound through a wall. The system remains unchanged. But when recognition is generated from within, even without witnesses, the structure updates. The wave function reorganizes. Outcomes that were previously inaccessible begin to align because the internal signal has changed. Waiting to be seen feels passive, but it is not neutral. Waiting is an active broadcast. It transmits expectation of delay, dependence on external confirmation, and an assumption of incompletion. The field responds to that with remarkable accuracy. It delivers more waiting, more deferral, more situations where recognition seems just out of reach. This is not cruelty. It is coherence. The signal and the response match. The moment waiting dissolves, the entire configuration shifts. Not because something was earned, but because something was acknowledged. Internal recognition says, I am not incomplete. I am available. I am already here. That statement does not need words. It is carried in posture, in breath, in the absence of bracing. The field reads that immediately. It does not question it. It reorganizes around it. This is why recognition is a quantum event rather than an emotional one. Emotions may accompany it, but they are not the cause. The cause is structural. A system that was broadcasting lack updates its baseline. A system that was scanning for permission stops scanning. When that happens, timelines dependent on permission collapse. Timelines dependent on self-generated coherence activate. The transition can feel sudden because the reorganization happens beneath thought. Many people mistake recognition for confidence or self-belief, but those are mental states. Recognition is deeper. It is pre-verbal. It is the end of seeking at the level of signal. Once it occurs, seeking feels unnecessary, even illogical. The system no longer asks, will I be acknowledged? It asks, what aligns next? That question produces very different outcomes. Nothing external needs to change first for recognition to be valid. In fact, waiting for external change before recognizing yourself guarantees delay. The sequence is non-negotiable. Recognition precedes response. Internal acknowledgement precedes external reflection. This is not philosophy. It is mechanics. When recognition stabilizes, it does not inflate identity. It neutralizes it. The urgency to be seen dissolves because the system has already registered itself as present. And when that happens, reality has no option but to respond differently, because the broadcast it is receiving has fundamentally changed. Before thought forms and before intention is declared, transmission is already happening. Reality is not responding to what you say you want, but to what your system is signaling beneath language. This is the level where change either becomes possible or remains theoretical. Transmission is not conceptual. It is physiological. And the primary transmitter is not the mind. It is the body. The nervous system is the interface between consciousness and the field. It is constantly scanning, predicting, and broadcasting based on what it has learned to expect. Long before beliefs were formed, the body learned patterns. It learned whether reaching outward resulted in safety or disappointment. It learned whether openness was rewarded or punished. Those lessons became baseline states, embedded not as memories, but as posture, breath, muscle tone, and orientation toward the world. This is why two people can hold the same desire and receive radically different outcomes. The field is not responding to the desire. It is responding to the baseline. One body may broadcast ease, expectation, and availability. Another may broadcast vigilance, restraint, and preparation for loss. These broadcasts are not chosen consciously. They are conditioned responses that run continuously unless interrupted by awareness. Posture alone communicates volumes. A body that leans forward subtly, shoulders raised, breath shallow, is broadcasting anticipation and effort. A body that is upright but relaxed, breath deep and unforced, is broadcasting readiness without strain. The field does not interpret these signals symbolically. It responds to them literally. It delivers experiences that match the expectation encoded in the body. Breath is especially precise. Shallow, held, or hurried breathing signals threat and urgency. Slow, expansive breathing signals safety and capacity. These signals are sent thousands of times per day, unnoticed by the mind but clearly registered by the field. The nervous system does not lie. It cannot pretend to expect ease while preparing for impact. And reality mirrors that preparation with uncanny accuracy. Early conditioning plays a decisive role here. When care was inconsistent, when recognition had to be earned, when attention felt conditional, the body adapted. It learned to stay alert. To brace. To perform. Those adaptations were intelligent responses at the time. They kept the system functional. But what once protected now constrains. The same vigilance that ensured survival now limits reception. Embodied expectation is not a thought like, I expect things to work out. It is a felt assumption that lives below awareness. It answers questions before they are asked. Will support arrive? Will effort be required? Will disappointment follow? The body answers first, and the mind builds stories afterward to justify the outcome. This is why attempting to change reality through thought alone produces frustration. The mind may declare openness while the body remains guarded. The field responds to the guard, not the declaration. Until the body updates its expectation, the signal remains unchanged. Understanding that the body is the broadcaster is not meant to create self-blame. It is meant to restore agency. If the signal is embodied, it can be felt. And if it can be felt, it can be softened. Not through force, but through awareness. The body does not need to be convinced. It needs to feel safe enough to release the patterns it no longer needs to carry. Once transmission is understood at this level, change stops being abstract. It becomes tangible. It moves from ideas to sensations. And that is where reality actually listens. Thought-based manifestation fails not because intention is weak, but because intention is not the primary signal. The mind can repeat affirmations endlessly while the body broadcasts the opposite instruction. Reality responds to the contradiction, not the statement. This is why so many people feel as if they are doing everything right and still receiving the same outcomes. The system is coherent, just not in the way the mind assumes. Affirmations operate at the level of language. Positive thinking operates at the level of cognition. But reality does not listen at those levels. It listens at the level of embodied expectation. That is the layer beneath thought, beneath emotion, where the nervous system has already decided what is likely, what is safe, and what must be prepared for. If that layer expects resistance, delay, or loss, no amount of verbal optimism will override it. The field receives the expectation, not the words. Embodied expectation is not a belief you can argue with. It is a felt assumption that lives in the body as tension, pacing, breath, and readiness for impact. You can say, I am supported, while your shoulders remain tight, your breath shallow, and your attention scanning for what might go wrong. The field does not interpret the affirmation. It responds to the scan. And it delivers experiences that justify the scan. This is why optimism often collapses under pressure. Optimism is fragile when it is not backed by coherence. The moment something challenges it, the body reasserts its baseline and the old signal returns. Coherence, on the other hand, does not depend on mood. It is alignment between body, emotion, and expectation. When coherence is present, thought naturally follows. When it is absent, thought becomes performative. Many teachings encourage you to think differently without addressing the deeper contradiction. This creates internal conflict. The mind pushes forward while the body resists. The result is fatigue, self-doubt, and the sense that something is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong. The system is simply responding to the strongest signal available, which is almost always the somatic one. Coherence does not require positivity. It requires honesty. The body must feel what the mind is declaring. Until the nervous system registers safety, availability, and readiness, affirmations remain noise. The field filters them out. Not as rejection, but as irrelevance. Signal strength comes from alignment, not enthusiasm. When people experience sudden shifts that feel like manifestation working, it is rarely because they thought harder. It is because something in the body relaxed. The breath changed. The posture softened. The expectation updated. And the field responded immediately, not because it was convinced, but because the instruction changed. This understanding removes blame. You do not need to force belief or maintain constant positivity. You need coherence. And coherence begins with noticing the contradiction without trying to fix it. Awareness starts the reorganization. When the body no longer broadcasts resistance, thought no longer needs to compensate. If this distinction is landing clearly for you, like the video now as a confirmation that this recognition has landed. Waiting is often mistaken for patience, maturity, or trust in timing. But at the level where reality responds, waiting is not neutral. It is an active frequency. It broadcasts expectation of delay. It signals that something essential is not yet available, not yet permitted, not yet safe to receive. The field responds to that signal with precision. It delivers more circumstances that require waiting. Striving and proving operate on the same channel. When effort becomes the prerequisite for arrival, the system broadcasts that arrival is conditional. That broadcast does not go unnoticed. Reality mirrors it by offering situations that demand more endurance, more preparation, more justification before anything resolves. This is not because effort is wrong. It is because effort framed as necessity creates a loop with no completion point. Waiting feels passive, but internally it is tense. The body leans forward into the future. Attention scans for signs. The nervous system remains partially braced. This posture tells the field that the present moment is insufficient. And because creation only occurs in the present, postponement becomes self-sustaining. The more one waits, the more waiting is reinforced. Longing is often confused with readiness. They are not the same. Longing looks toward what is missing. Readiness rests in what is available. Longing says, when this arrives, I will relax. Readiness says, I am already able to receive. These states feel similar emotionally, but they produce opposite outcomes energetically. Longing keeps the signal open-ended. Readiness closes the circuit. Readiness is quiet. It does not announce itself. It is felt as an absence of urgency rather than an increase of desire. When readiness is present, the body stops leaning forward. Breath settles. Attention returns to now. The field recognizes this immediately because the broadcast changes from anticipation to availability. Probability reorganizes around that shift. Many people believe that waiting is respectful, that pushing is wrong, and that wanting without acting is virtuous. But the field does not interpret virtue. It interprets signal. A system that is always waiting tells reality, not yet. A system that is always striving tells reality, not enough. And reality complies with both instructions. This does not mean you must force readiness. Forcing is just another form of striving. Readiness emerges when waiting is seen clearly. When you notice how your body reacts to pauses, to stillness, to moments where nothing is required, you begin to see the broadcast underneath the story. That awareness alone starts to dissolve the frequency of delay. The shift from waiting to readiness is not dramatic. It is subtle. It is the moment you stop preparing for arrival and allow arrival to be normal. Not guaranteed. Not demanded. Just normal. This normalization is what the field responds to most strongly. Not intensity. Not desire. Familiarity. When readiness replaces waiting, opportunities no longer feel distant. Timing shortens. Resistance softens. Not because you chased harder, but because the signal no longer asked for postponement. The system stops saying, soon, and starts saying, now, without urgency, without pressure. If you feel this distinction settling in your body, comment with the words, "I am ready," to anchor this timeline. Coherence is the point where everything stops arguing. It is not a concept you adopt, but a state the system enters when its parts agree. Before coherence, the body signals one thing, the mind imagines another, and emotion fluctuates between the two. After coherence, there is alignment. Not perfection, not positivity, but consistency. And consistency is the only language the field answers. Coherence is the alignment of body, emotion, and expectation into a single instruction. When these layers are synchronized, the signal strengthens. When they are fragmented, the signal scatters. The field does not choose between them. It averages them. This is why mixed states produce mixed results. A hopeful thought paired with a guarded body produces delay. A calm body paired with anxious expectation produces inconsistency. Only when the layers agree does probability organize cleanly. The body leads this alignment. Emotion follows physiology before it follows narrative. When the body softens, emotion stabilizes. When emotion stabilizes, expectation updates. Thought then arranges itself around what is already felt. This is why coherence is felt before it is understood. The nervous system recognizes alignment instantly. The mind catches up later, often trying to explain what has already occurred. You can sense coherence as a subtle absence of friction. Breathing becomes easier without effort. Attention settles without force. There is less internal commentary, not because thoughts disappear, but because they no longer need to negotiate. The system is no longer split. That unity is not dramatic. It is quiet. And because it is quiet, it is often overlooked by those expecting intensity. The field responds to this quiet unity with precision. Timing adjusts. Encounters align. Obstacles soften. Not as reward, but as response. Coherence sends a clear instruction, this system is ready to interact without resistance. The field answers by reducing friction. This reduction is what people experience as flow, luck, or synchronicity, though none of those words capture the mechanics at work. Incoherence, by contrast, is effortful. It feels like pushing against invisible resistance. The mind tries to override the body. Emotion swings between hope and doubt. Expectation fluctuates. The signal becomes noisy. The field reflects that noise as unpredictability. Not because it is confused, but because it is mirroring inconsistency. Coherence cannot be forced. Any attempt to manufacture it introduces tension, which immediately breaks alignment. Coherence emerges when the system stops arguing with itself. This often happens through simple awareness. Noticing where the body is tight. Noticing where emotion is braced. Noticing without correcting. Observation itself begins to synchronize the layers. This is why understanding coherence intellectually is insufficient. You can describe it perfectly and remain incoherent. The field does not respond to explanation. It responds to state. And state is embodied. When coherence is present, the body communicates readiness without urgency. Emotion communicates stability without suppression. Expectation communicates openness without longing. Once coherence is established, even briefly, the system remembers it. The nervous system recognizes the absence of threat and the presence of alignment. That recognition makes it easier to return. Over time, coherence becomes less of an event and more of a baseline. And from that baseline, reality has no option but to respond differently, because the language being spoken has changed. This is the threshold. Everything that follows depends on whether coherence is understood as an idea or embodied as a state. The field only answers one of those. The field you are interacting with is not emotional, personal, or strategic. It does not weigh intentions, evaluate effort, or respond to persuasion. It is neutral. Completely. And neutrality is often mistaken for indifference when it is actually precision. The field mirrors what is consistently transmitted, not what is desperately requested. Fear does not move the field. Pleading does not soften it. Bargaining does not influence it. These states feel active internally, but externally they register as instability. Fear fragments the signal. Pleading weakens it. Bargaining splits it into conditions. The field does not interpret the story behind these states. It receives the fragmentation and responds with matching inconsistency. This is why intense emotional spikes so often fail to produce lasting change. Emotional surges create temporary signal strength, but they lack stability. They rise quickly and collapse just as fast. The field responds briefly, if at all, because there is nothing steady to organize around. Once the spike passes, the system returns to its baseline, and the response dissipates. What remains is often disappointment and confusion, not because the field withdrew, but because coherence was never sustained. Calm, by contrast, is not weak. Calm is dense. A calm signal carries weight because it is consistent. It does not fluctuate dramatically. It does not demand immediate results. It simply broadcasts readiness without tension. The field responds more strongly to this kind of signal because it can organize probability around it without interruption. Negotiation implies resistance. It assumes the field must be convinced, appeased, or persuaded. That assumption is itself a broadcast of opposition. The field answers that opposition with friction. Not as a lesson, but as a mirror. When the system stops negotiating, resistance dissolves because there is nothing to push against. Neutrality also means the field does not favor suffering or ease. It does not reward hardship or punish comfort. It reflects the internal relationship you have with those states. A system that equates value with struggle will encounter more struggle. A system that normalizes ease will encounter fewer barriers. The field is not choosing sides. It is matching frequency. This understanding removes the impulse to perform emotionally for results. You do not need to be intensely grateful, wildly optimistic, or dramatically focused. Those states can be enjoyable, but they are not required. What matters is stability. A calm expectation held consistently outperforms any emotional peak followed by collapse. This is also why calm can feel uncomfortable at first. A nervous system accustomed to intensity interprets calm as emptiness or lack of progress. It may try to reintroduce urgency, fear, or effort to feel productive again. But productivity at the level of the field is measured by coherence, not motion. Stillness that is aligned is far more generative than movement that is conflicted. When you stop negotiating, something subtle shifts. You are no longer asking reality to change. You are no longer arguing with what is present. You are simply broadcasting what is stable. The field responds immediately, not always with visible outcomes, but with reduced resistance. That reduction is the first sign that the signal is being received. The field does not need to be convinced because it is not deciding. It is responding. And response only requires one thing, a signal clear enough, calm enough, and consistent enough to organize around. Everything else is noise. Structural change rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with certainty, intensity, or visible confirmation. It begins quietly, at the level of micro-adjustments that seem too small to matter. A slightly slower breath. A momentary release of tension. A pause before reacting. These shifts feel insignificant to the mind, but they are decisive to the system that reality responds to. The field does not measure magnitude the way the mind does. It measures consistency. Small embodied changes that are repeated stabilize the signal far more effectively than dramatic efforts that spike and collapse. Each subtle shift adjusts the baseline just enough to alter what the system expects. Over time, those adjustments compound, reorganizing probability in ways that are cumulative rather than immediate. This is why transformation often appears delayed. The internal signal changes first. The external reflection follows later. There is always a lag between broadcast and manifestation because probability must redistribute. Timelines must realign. Conditions must converge. During this phase, nothing seems different, and this is where most people abandon the process. They assume nothing is happening because nothing is visible. But invisibility is not absence. It is incubation. The mind expects cause and effect to be close together. When they are not, it doubts the cause. It looks for proof, reassurance, signs. But the field does not respond to doubt any more than it responds to hope. It responds to what is stable. When small shifts are maintained without demanding confirmation, the signal strengthens. When confirmation is demanded prematurely, the signal fragments. This is why people miss alignment by expecting dramatic change. Drama feels like progress. Calm feels like nothing. But calm is often the first sign that resistance has dropped. When the body no longer braces, when the nervous system stops anticipating impact, the signal becomes cleaner. The field registers this immediately, even if circumstances take time to reflect it. Structural change is cumulative. Each moment of coherence reinforces the next. Each instance of ease makes ease more familiar. Each time the body remains open without proof, the expectation of support deepens. Eventually, the accumulation reaches a threshold where external conditions begin to shift noticeably. Timing improves. Obstacles dissolve before confrontation. Opportunities appear without pursuit. When this happens, it feels sudden, but it is not. It is the visible phase of a process that has been underway for some time. Many people interpret the absence of struggle as stagnation. They are accustomed to effort signaling progress. When effort drops, they reintroduce tension to feel productive again. This resets the signal and prolongs the delay. The field mirrors the reset with renewed resistance. Not as punishment, but as coherence. Alignment is subtle by nature. It does not shout. It does not prove itself. It unfolds through small confirmations that are easy to dismiss. A conversation that flows unexpectedly. A delay that resolves itself. A solution that appears without strain. These are not coincidences. They are indicators that the signal has shifted and the field is responding. The key is not to chase these indicators or demand more of them. Noticing is enough. Acknowledgement stabilizes coherence. Gratitude, when genuine, reinforces safety. But even without naming it, remaining present to the subtle changes allows them to compound. Structural change does not require force. It requires patience of a different kind. Not waiting, but allowing. Not striving, but staying. When small shifts are honored instead of dismissed, they accumulate into something unmistakable. And when the external shift finally becomes visible, it will feel less like a miracle and more like a natural consequence of what has already been established. Before change can stabilize, it must be embodied. Not understood, not agreed with, not visualized, but lived at the level where signals are generated. Embodiment is where insight becomes instruction. It is where awareness moves out of thought and into sensation. And this is the point where systems actually reorganize. Awareness has a property that effort does not. It does not push against what it observes. It does not argue, correct, or force. It simply notices. And that noticing alone alters the system being observed. This is not philosophical language. It is how self-regulating systems behave. When attention is brought to a pattern without judgment, the pattern loses the friction that keeps it running automatically. Most people attempt to change themselves through effort. They apply pressure, discipline, and control. They try to replace one pattern with another. But effort signals resistance. It tells the system that something is wrong and must be overridden. The nervous system interprets this as threat and tightens further. The result is temporary compliance followed by rebound. The field reflects this oscillation with instability. Awareness works differently. When you observe a pattern without trying to stop it, the system receives a new signal: there is enough safety here to see clearly. That safety is what allows reorganization. The nervous system no longer needs to defend the pattern because it is not under attack. In that space, adjustment happens naturally. This is why awareness is more powerful than effort. Effort fights the system. Awareness communicates with it. When attention rests on breath, posture, or tension without judgment, those elements begin to shift on their own. The breath deepens. Muscles release. Pace slows. Not because you commanded them to, but because the system sensed coherence. Observation also interrupts unconscious broadcasting. Patterns that were invisible lose their momentum once seen. A habitual brace in the chest. A reflexive tightening before speaking. A subtle lean into the future. These are not corrected. They are noticed. And in being noticed, they soften. Consciousness reorganizes systems simply by illuminating them. This process feels deceptively simple, which is why it is often dismissed. The mind expects change to require effort proportional to the problem. Awareness feels too gentle to be effective. But gentleness is precisely what allows the nervous system to update. Force reinforces old expectations. Presence dissolves them. Attention is the currency here. Where attention rests without tension, coherence emerges. Where attention is scattered or compulsive, incoherence persists. This is why attention matters more than action. Action without awareness repeats patterns. Awareness without action changes them at the source. When awareness becomes consistent, the baseline begins to shift. The system learns that it can remain present without bracing. That learning rewrites expectation. And expectation is what the field responds to. Not effort. Not intention. Attention. This does not mean you must monitor yourself constantly. That becomes another form of effort. Awareness is relaxed. It allows. It does not chase improvement. It notices what is already happening. And in that noticing, the system aligns. Once this is understood, change stops being something you do and becomes something you allow. You are no longer managing reality. You are participating in it consciously. And from that participation, coherence stabilizes naturally, because nothing is being resisted. This is the pivot point. Everything that follows depends on whether awareness is used as a tool for control or allowed to function as a field of permission. Only one of those rewrites the system. Safety is not a luxury state that comes after success. It is the prerequisite that allows anything to be received at all. Until the nervous system registers safety, it does not matter what opportunities appear, what affirmations are spoken, or what intentions are set. An unsafe system cannot receive. It can only prepare, protect, or endure. And the field responds to that preparation by delivering experiences that require exactly those responses. The nervous system does not evaluate safety the way the mind does. It does not respond to logic or reassurance. It responds to sensation, to tone, to rhythm, to whether the body feels permitted to rest without consequence. For many people, ease is unfamiliar. Calm feels suspicious. Support feels temporary. These reactions are not flaws. They are learned responses shaped by environments where relaxation led to disappointment or vulnerability led to loss. Because of this conditioning, the nervous system often mistrusts ease more than struggle. Struggle is predictable. It provides structure. It gives the system something to manage. Ease, on the other hand, removes the familiar signals. There is no tension to hold on to, no problem to solve. For a system shaped by vigilance, that absence feels like danger. So it reintroduces tension, urgency, or effort to restore a sense of control. This is why receiving can feel uncomfortable even when it is desired. Praise can create tightening instead of relaxation. Stillness can produce restlessness instead of peace. Opportunities can trigger anxiety instead of excitement. The system is not rejecting what is good. It is protecting itself from what feels unfamiliar. And the field mirrors this protection by limiting how much can arrive at once. Safety is the gate because it determines capacity. A system that feels safe can allow without bracing. A system that feels unsafe constricts even in abundance. The field does not force its way past that gate. It respects it. It delivers only what the system can integrate without collapse. This is why progress often appears slower than expected. It is calibrated to safety, not desire. Somatic trust is what stabilizes this gate. Not intellectual trust, not belief that things will work out, but a felt sense that the body can remain open without immediate threat. Somatic trust develops through repetition of safe experiences, not dramatic leaps. Each time the body relaxes and nothing bad happens, trust deepens. Each time support arrives and is allowed to stay, the baseline updates. This process cannot be rushed. Forcing openness signals danger. Demanding ease creates tension. Somatic trust grows when the system is met where it is, not where it should be. When awareness notices contraction without judgment. When breath softens without instruction. When rest is allowed without justification. These moments tell the nervous system that receiving does not equal risk. As safety stabilizes, capacity expands. The system can hold more without tightening. Expectation shifts from anticipation of loss to allowance of support. The field responds to this shift immediately by reducing resistance. Not necessarily by delivering more, but by removing obstacles. Flow increases because the gate is no longer partially closed. Understanding safety as the gate changes everything. You stop trying to force outcomes and start supporting the system that receives them. You stop measuring progress by speed and start measuring it by ease. And as ease becomes familiar, the gate opens wider, not through effort, but through trust. Repetition is often misunderstood as a way to convince reality to respond. But reality does not need persuasion. The field is already responding continuously. What repetition actually trains is the nervous system. It conditions the body to hold a signal long enough for that response to stabilize. This distinction changes how effort is applied and why so many people exhaust themselves without lasting results. The field does not count how many times something is said, visualized, or intended. It does not respond incrementally to repetition. It responds instantly to state. When the state is inconsistent, the response is inconsistent. Repetition does not strengthen the field's response. It strengthens the body's ability to remain coherent without reverting to old patterns. This is why intensity is less effective than consistency. Intensity produces spikes. Spikes feel powerful, motivating, and emotionally convincing. But they are short-lived. Once the spike collapses, the nervous system returns to its familiar baseline, and the signal reverts with it. The field mirrors that return. Nothing new stabilizes. Consistency works differently. Small, repeated exposures to coherence teach the body what is safe to sustain. Each time the system relaxes and nothing collapses, the baseline shifts slightly. Each time the breath softens without consequence, the nervous system updates its prediction. Over time, what once felt unfamiliar becomes tolerable. What once felt tolerable becomes normal. This is how a new baseline forms. Not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through repetition that feels almost boring to the mind. The mind craves novelty and confirmation. The body craves predictability and safety. Repetition provides exactly that. It tells the nervous system, this state can be maintained. And once a state can be maintained, the field organizes around it. This process is cumulative. Early repetitions feel ineffective because the baseline has not yet shifted enough to register change. The mind interprets this as failure. But the body is learning quietly. It is recalibrating thresholds. It is rewriting expectation. When the shift becomes visible externally, it often appears sudden. In reality, it has been underway for some time. Repetition must be gentle. Forcing repetition creates resistance. Demanding results creates tension. Both signal threat, which resets the system. Effective repetition is almost unremarkable. A consistent way of breathing. A habitual pause before reacting. A regular return to presence. These actions do not announce themselves as transformation, but they are. As the new baseline stabilizes, the effort required to maintain it decreases. What once took intention becomes automatic. The body begins to default to openness rather than vigilance. Expectation adjusts accordingly. And because the field responds to default states, not peak states, reality begins to reflect the new normal. This is why repetition is not about discipline. It is about familiarity. The nervous system must learn that coherence is not a temporary exception, but a safe place to live. Once that learning is complete, repetition is no longer required. The signal holds itself. When the baseline changes, the conversation with reality changes. Outcomes that once required effort begin to arrive with less resistance. Timing improves without planning. Support appears without pursuit. This is not because repetition finally convinced the field. It is because repetition trained the body to stop contradicting the signal it was already sending. Understanding this removes urgency from practice. There is nothing to force and nothing to rush. Each repetition is simply another confirmation to the nervous system that it is safe to remain coherent. And once that safety is established, the response from reality becomes not only reliable, but ordinary. Identity is not a label you choose. It is a state you occupy. And that state determines which version of reality you experience. You are not shaping the world through force or intention. You are selecting from existing possibilities based on what feels normal for you to receive. This is the level where urgency dissolves, because selection does not require effort. It only requires alignment. Most people believe they are trying to change reality. In doing so, they position themselves outside of it, pushing against something fixed. This creates tension and reinforces the sense that outcomes must be earned or forced. But reality is not static. It exists as a range of probabilities, all available, all responsive. Which one stabilizes depends on the identity being broadcast through the nervous system. Identity, in this sense, is not personality or self-image. It is the sum of what your system expects, allows, and recognizes as familiar. If struggle feels normal, struggle is selected. If support feels unusual, it remains intermittent. If ease feels unsafe, it does not stabilize. The field does not override these defaults. It mirrors them. Manifestation is often framed as creation, but it functions more accurately as selection. You are not pulling something into existence. You are aligning with what already exists in a configuration that matches your baseline. When receiving becomes normalized, the corresponding timeline becomes accessible. When receiving feels foreign, that timeline remains unstable. This reframing dissolves urgency because there is nothing to chase. You are not late. You are not behind. You are simply oriented toward one set of probabilities instead of another. The moment orientation shifts, selection shifts with it. There is no waiting period imposed by the field. Any delay that occurs is a function of the system acclimating to a new baseline. Normalized receiving is the key. It does not mean assuming everything will arrive effortlessly. It means no longer being surprised by support. It means allowing good outcomes to register without immediately questioning their permanence. It means letting ease be unremarkable. This neutrality is what stabilizes a new identity. Urgency often arises when identity is in transition. The old baseline feels insufficient, and the new one has not yet stabilized. The mind tries to bridge the gap with effort. But effort pulls attention back to the old identity, the one that believes arrival requires strain. Selection cannot occur from that state because the signal is mixed. When urgency is released, something clarifies. The system stops oscillating between longing and control. It settles into recognition. Recognition of capacity. Recognition of availability. Recognition that nothing external needs to change first. From this state, action becomes clean. Decisions feel obvious rather than pressured. Timing aligns without planning. This does not make you passive. It makes you precise. Instead of scattering energy across possibilities, identity narrows selection naturally. Certain options lose relevance. Others gain traction. The process feels less like striving and more like gravitation. You are drawn toward what matches you. Once this is understood, the idea of changing reality loses meaning. You are always in conversation with it. The only question is which version you are reinforcing. And that is determined not by what you want, but by what you consistently allow. When identity stabilizes around coherence and receiving, reality responds accordingly. Not as a reward, but as a reflection. The urgency to get somewhere fades, because you recognize that where you are broadcasting from determines where you arrive. An arrival, in this framework, is not a destination. It is a state of alignment that makes certain outcomes inevitable simply because they are the closest match. When coherence becomes normal, life stops feeling like something you must manage. The constant background effort fades, not because challenges disappear, but because resistance does. This shift is subtle at first, then unmistakable. You are no longer trying to stay aligned. You simply are. And from that state, everything moves differently. Effort dissolves because it is no longer required to maintain stability. The body is not braced. The nervous system is not scanning for threat. Breath moves naturally. Attention rests without strain. Action still happens, but it arises from clarity rather than urgency. You do what is needed because it makes sense, not because you are trying to secure an outcome. This is what intuitive action feels like. It is efficient, proportionate, and unforced. When coherence stabilizes, decisions become simpler. Not because options disappear, but because relevance becomes obvious. You no longer debate endlessly or second-guess constantly. The system recognizes what aligns and what does not. Choices feel clean. Timing feels cooperative. You move when movement is appropriate and pause when pause is required, without interpreting stillness as failure. Reality begins to feel collaborative rather than oppositional. Situations respond instead of resist. Obstacles soften before confrontation. Support appears without negotiation. This does not mean everything unfolds perfectly, but it does mean that life meets you halfway. There is less friction between intention and outcome because the signal being broadcast is consistent. This collaboration is not magical thinking. It is relational mechanics. A coherent system interacts smoothly with its environment. A conflicted system encounters friction. When coherence becomes your baseline, the field reflects that baseline by reducing interference. The result feels like flow, but it is simply alignment functioning as designed. One of the most significant changes at this stage is the absence of urgency. The feeling that something must happen soon or else dissolves. There is trust, not as belief, but as embodied knowing. The system no longer anticipates loss by default. It expects continuity. From that expectation, patience becomes natural rather than forced. Coherence at this level is irreversible, not because you cannot experience stress again, but because the body remembers alignment. Just as survival patterns once dominated, coherence now does. When disruption occurs, the system returns to baseline more quickly. Recovery accelerates. The nervous system knows where home is. This is why people who reach this stage often struggle to explain it. There is nothing dramatic to point to. No constant euphoria. Just a steady sense that things work. That you are supported without having to ask. That effort is applied where it belongs and absent where it does not. The mind stops searching for techniques because the state is self-sustaining. From here, growth continues, but it feels different. Expansion happens through expression rather than striving. Contribution replaces self-correction. You are no longer focused on fixing yourself or your life. You are participating in it. This is not an end point. It is a foundation. A new normal from which deeper layers of alignment can unfold. But once coherence becomes familiar, the old way of operating feels foreign. The constant push, the waiting, the bargaining no longer makes sense. The system has learned a different language. And because the body has embodied it, that language does not disappear. It remains available, stable, and reliable. Reality continues to respond, not because you are doing something right, but because you are no longer contradicting yourself. This window was never meant to stay open indefinitely. Not because something is being taken from you, but because coherence does not linger where it is not met. Windows exist when readiness and attention briefly align. They close when that alignment disperses. This is not threat. It is function. And understanding this removes fear from urgency. Urgency here is informational, not emotional. It is not asking you to rush or strain. It is simply signaling that conditions are currently optimal for recognition to complete its work. When the nervous system is receptive, when awareness is present, when coherence has been felt rather than conceptualized, probability narrows. Certain trajectories become available. Others fade. This narrowing is how selection occurs. The mind often wants to keep everything open. It prefers options to commitment, understanding to embodiment. But embodiment is what completes the circuit. Knowing something intellectually does not change the broadcast. Only what is lived at the level of sensation, posture, breath, and expectation alters the signal the field receives. This is why insight alone fades. Embodiment stabilizes. You do not need more information. You need presence. The work is no longer about learning new ideas or refining explanations. It is about allowing what has already been recognized to settle into the body without interruption. That settling is quiet. It does not announce itself. It feels like a reduction of internal noise rather than an increase of certainty. This is why the window closes whether you engage or not. Not because you failed to act, but because attention moved elsewhere. Consciousness follows attention. And attention follows readiness. When readiness is present, the system can integrate. When it is not, integration stalls. The field reallocates. Life continues to respond, just to a different signal. There is no penalty for missing a window. There is only the reality that the same configuration does not repeat in the same way. New windows appear later, but they are shaped by who you are then, not who you are now. This is why postponement often feels like stagnation. It is not that nothing is happening. It is that something reorganized beyond your current line of sight. The invitation here is simple. Do not store this as knowledge. Do not turn it into another concept to revisit later. Let it register somatically. Notice your breath. Notice your posture. Notice whether you are leaning forward or resting where you are. These are not techniques. They are checkpoints. They tell you whether embodiment is occurring. Nothing needs to be forced. Nothing needs to be proven. The only thing required is allowing coherence to remain without immediately reaching for the next explanation. When coherence is allowed to stay, even briefly, the system updates. And once updated, it does not forget. This is how windows complete themselves. Not through effort, but through recognition that is allowed to settle fully. The mind may still ask questions. That is fine. Questions do not disrupt coherence unless they pull attention away from the body. Stay here long enough for the signal to stabilize, and reality will respond in ways that feel ordinary, timely, and unmistakable. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it before their timeline closes.